Welcome to this Association for the Study of Obesity webinar entitled Diabetes, Obesity and COVID-19. I'd like to offer my warmest welcomes on behalf of ASO to all of you who have taken the trouble to attend this webinar this evening. I'm speaking to you live from South Wales in the United Kingdom, where the weather is absolutely gorgeous. So I assume that it's nice wherever you are as well, and you've given up a lot this evening to join us. I have a few announcements to make just before we move on to the program. And one of the things I have to do with regard to compliance is to read out a statement. You'll see this statement on the foot of the slide at the moment and on the foot of many of the speaker slides as well. But I say, to be compliant, I do actually have to read it out. So we'd like to thank Novo Nordisk, particularly for sponsoring this event this evening. That sponsorship has allowed us to fully fund all of the costs for the development of this webinar, including the creation, the organization, production and administration. And I'd just like to emphasize that Novo Nordisk have had no influence on the content, and ASO control full editorial rights. So as we move along, I'd also like to give my thanks to a number of people, two people in particular to begin with, and that's Francesco Rubino, who you'll hear from in a moment, and my good friend and colleague Abd Tarani, because Francesco and Abd have worked extremely hard over the last couple of weeks to create the program that we have this evening. I'd also like to thank Production Bureau, who are the IT specialists who are working hard behind the scenes. This is a new partnership between ASO and Production Bureau. We've put this webinar together really quite quickly, so hopefully everything will go very, very smoothly and efficiently. And as always, I'd like to thank Bioscientifica, who are the association management company that help ASO, the Association for the Study of Obesity, with all of its activities, and they've also been played a very important part. And importantly, once this webinar is concluded, my colleagues from Bioscientifica will email, I think, a post-webinar evaluation questionnaire to you. So if you could take some time and some trouble to complete that, that would be really, really helpful, because this is the first webinar that ASO have produced, the first webinar ever, as far as I'm aware. Of course, we're all aware of the circumstances that we're living in at the moment and why we have to resort to these webinars. In about 2 months' time, ASO was scheduled to hold its annual Congress at the University of Oxford, but of course, like lots of other events, that's had to be cancelled. So we're rapidly trying to put in place as many activities such as this one for our members and non-members alike. So I'd just like to also, of course, thank our illustrious speakers and panelists for giving up their time and taking part in this webinar this evening. I'd just like to very quickly, if I can, go through our panelists so that we know who we have with us this evening. As I say, in a moment, I'll hand over to Professor Francesco Rubino, who's Chair of Metabolic and Bariatric Surgery at King's College London. Also speaking this evening is Dr. Abd Tarani. Abd is well known to many people in the field of obesity. He's a consultant endocrinologist and bariatric physician at the University Hospitals Birmingham. We welcome Professor Carol LaRue, who is a professor of metabolic medicine from University College Dublin in Ireland. Dr. Barbara McCowan, who's a consultant endocrinologist at Guy's and St Thomas's Hospital in London. Dr. Stephanie DiGiorgio, who's a general practitioner with a specialist interest in obesity. Professor Kamlesh Kunti, who's Professor of Primary Care, Diabetes and Vascular Medicine at the University of Leicester. Dr. David Hopkins, who's Consultant Diabetes Physician at King's College London. Sarah LeBrock, who's Director of Obesity UK. We welcome Sarah. Professor David Kerrigan, who's Professor of Bariatric Surgery at Phoenix Health. And in a moment, you'll hear from our first speaker, who's Professor Stefan Bornstein, who's Chair of Medicine at the University of Dresden. So I'd like now, if I can, to hand over as smoothly as possible to Francesco, who will further introduce tonight's webinar and our series of speakers.